I just had a great conversation with Robert Haas, about dreams. And he's a scientist that's been digging into the dreaming brain and what is happening in our dreams, and also the psychological power of dreams in terms of our healing and emotional resolution of trauma. He also, in this conversation, we talk about what he calls soul dreaming, which it has to do with lucid dreaming. And in the full episode, we talk about a very moving account of these lucid dreams that he had encountering his wife who has dementia in kind of a spirit form. And anyway, just this has just been a fascinating conversation. One of the things that also comes into the conversation is tapping. And I just wanted to explain a little bit because we don't really get into what that is if you're not familiar with it. Tapping is a word that refers to something also known as EFT, or emotional freedom technique, and it's a way of working somatically with the body to resolve strong emotion connected to trauma. And so there's a series of points that you tap on the body, and you could learn this. This is everywhere on YouTube. You can find out ways to do it, but it's such a powerful technique of resolving and healing trauma. And so I just wanted to explain that so that when it comes up in this conversation, you'll know a little bit more about it. So anyway, I think you're going to love this conversation with Bob Haas. And I ask you to just like, subscribe, and share this conversation so that others who are interested in this kind of material can hear this conversation too. Thanks. Welcome to The Sacred Everywhere. I'm Dr. Sheri Kling, and in this space we explore how the sacred shows up in real life, in our questions, our struggles, our longing, and our hope. Can we find the sacred in every place and everyone? Let's see. All right. So let's get started. Hello, Bob
Okay.
Haas. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, Sherry.
And we've been intersecting in a lot of ways in the Hayden Institute conferences, and obviously also in the natural spirituality events online. And so we've known each other for a long time. But I think what I'd like to do is have you start by just talking a little bit about briefly how you got into dream research to begin with.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I had a background in the sciences, and so I was always interested in science, and most of my day job was in industry. But I had a lot of early training in Gestalt therapy and a number of humanistic psychologies that associated them either with dreams or just as psychological training. So I got my interest that way, and I taught a course many years ago at Richland College, or which is now a university, I think, on dream psychology for a number of years. And so I've always been kind of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But because of my scientific background, I'm also very interested in dream research because it's fascinating. The more what's happening today, of course, is we're getting more involved in the ability to do deep brain scans and somehow associate them with psychological theory and do with through testing and things like that. We could determine that indeed there's no difference between the brain and psychology, that the two disciplines seem to work together very well and they're proving each other out.
Yeah.
So research has been exciting, and I started a grant foundation together with the International Association for the Study of Dreams to try to help fund research. So that's my interest.
Yeah, that's great. So maybe also tell us a little bit about when cognitive science looks at the dreaming brain, and you've written a lot about how the different parts, and you don't need to get into the medical level detail, but
Yeah,
just in
right.
terms of what's happening in the brain as we're dreaming, and how does that connect to a psychological development.
Okay, great. Yeah, I kind of like to think of the dreaming brain as sort of an emotional problem solving and learning machine. Uh, there's a lot of types of dreams, and what I'm going to be just talking about is typically what happens at night, and also what we think of as dreams usually is the kind of dreams we remember from the REM stage when our rapid eye moves. We actually dream all night. And in the deeper sleep stages of sleep, the brain is learning. It's actually practicing going back over things you would just learn new that day, goes back over them. And so that they can be stored in longer term memory. And in the REM stages, we start dealing more with the emotional aspects of what happened that day and our perception of them, things of that sort, or taking what we learned and practiced in the non-REM stages and mixing that with our knowledge of the rest of the world and our internal model, so that what we learned that day, even though it might have just been how to ski or how to go through a maze or something like that, it becomes a part of our overall knowledge set and our personality and affects who we are.
Mm-hmm.
That occurs in those two phases of sleep. The learning that occurs early on or in the non-REM stages, the deep sleep, is pretty spectacular. One of the most recent studies on that by a person named Erin Walmsley did found that she trained some of her subjects on a maze, and that night they slept on it, and then she woke them up and it went back through the maze, and it turned out that those who had actually dreamed of it, and what she knew when they dreamed of it, because during the non-REM stages she'd wake them up and find out what their dreams are about. They
Uh-huh.
found out that those who had dreamed about it did 10 times better at going back through the maze. So we know we learn in dreams, but what's
Yeah.
it's exciting to me is what goes on with the emotional problem solving and learning part. What happens is when we go into the REM stage of sleep, our brain doesn't just totally go to sleep. A huge part of it stays awake. The
Mm-hmm.
part that sleeps is usually the frontal stages, which frontal parts of the brain, which deal with logical thinking and that sort of thing, and actually episodic memory, remembering what had happened the day before. Uh, and so what happened, because that part's asleep, we don't really have much self-reflection in our dreams. We kind of let our dreams drag us through them. And also, there's not a lot of linear thought because the dream can switch on us, and it just seems normal in the dream. So that's due to that part of the brain being kind of diminished or shut down. But what is active is the whole the whole emotional part of the brain, the whole limbic system. It gets very active, sometimes more active than waking state, and the areas around the frontal brain that deal with emotion and basically processing the emotion. So what kind of happens is when we have an event that occurs during the day, the event will split itself. There's two parts to it. Okay, I'll start out with one example here. Uh, this was a person a woman who got fired. This is the second time she'd gotten fired, and basically her thought was, and because her job this was so critical to who she wanted to be and what her career was all about,
Mm-hmm.
that she felt there is no future. It's all over for good. Okay, and that night when she went to sleep. Uh, Her dream was more about the fact that she perceived this as a death blow, and there's no future. It's all over for good, uh, and the dream was all about that, as you'll see. And the part about her being fired never appeared anywhere in the dream. So the brain, that limbic piece of the brain, the emotional processing part of the brain, basically is going to picture the scene and deal with it. And the way it did it was this. There are parts of the brain that are active in REM sleep that detect problems, and they select the problem to work on that night based
Hmm.
on various factors. And so the first thing that the dream did was it detected that she had this feeling about the fact that there's no future; it's all over for good, and it pictures the feeling. And that's what's
Hmm.
going on in our dreams is that brain is picturing the feelings. It's the back part of the brain that does all this picturing work,
Yeah.
and use a picture in terms of metaphor because it's the associative cortex of the brain. So it pictures the dream. So what or pictures the emotions and what happened in the dream. It began. She said, "I dreamed I was crushed under a building. It was all over for good."
Wow.
So nowhere did that dream show that she had been fired.
Right.
But it pictured her feelings of being crushed.
Hmm.
So that's the first thing that part of the brain does. The second thing is it uses the hippocampus and other parts of the brain to go back and look back in memory and say, did I ever feel this way before? What am I really going? Is this really over for good, etc.? So it goes back into memory, and it puts the dream in context.
Hmm.
Uh, and that puts the feelings in context and say, are these real or is this just momentary trauma? In this case, what it did, the dream showed her suddenly becoming another person.
Hmm.
And so in memory, went back and said, no, 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 it's not all over for good. You've got more than that inside of you. And then what the other person did is they started digging her out from under the rubble of the buildings. So this is the third thing the dream will do. And this is the most important and fascinating thing about what dreams do in REM state, is it created a little scenario,
Mhm.
a creative plan, various scenarios for testing out whether this is real and testing out various solutions to the problem. The solution to the problem here that the brain came up with was, hey, you can dig yourself out of this. You're stronger than that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so it showed her as coming alive again as a very strong person and digging herself out. So that was the message. And then what the dream does, which is clever, most of the dream is dragging you through these scenarios and these messages. And what it did is made her she was actually there, being dug out, feeling what it's like to be dug out. So the dream does that. And then if the dream likes the solution it came up with, and in this case it did, it usually rewards the individual. And the reward isn't just to make you feel good. The reward is part of the learning mechanism. The amygdala, which is responsible for a lot of these feelings, is right on the end of the hippocampus, which relates to the emotional memory. And it does something called memory reconsolidation. And
Hmm.
in this case, what it did is at the end of the dream, she said, I came alive again and I knew I could go on.
Wow.
So it gave her the feeling of the ability now to continue, that she could become this different person that's still within her, and it's not all over for good. And this whole function is called emotional memory reconsolidation,
Hmm.
and it's something that people do in therapy. Therapists do it,
Mm-hmm.
and with IRT, they'll use this approach. But it turns out your dream is doing the same thing by itself.
Wow.
And
Right.
the other important thing people will need to know is it happens whether you remember your dream or work on it or not.
Yeah.
Remember the dream because it was impactful, but you didn't work on it for a couple months when she came to me and told me this thing, and we discovered what it was about. We
Mm.
get fired, but in the meantime, she started her own company.
Oh, wow. So she already had
This
started
inner,
acting on.
she's already started acting on this because the decision and the learning was made in the dream,
Yeah.
whether
Yeah.
she worked on it or not. So that is a fascinating thing about how the brain works at night to help problem solve.
Yeah. There's a couple of examples that you've given in the over the years that have stuck with me so strongly, and that I will often share them with to other people. And one is the dream about and you can say more about each of these if you want, but the one is the dream about the guy that had been offered a new position in a field he hadn't worked in a while, and
Oh
then
yeah,
saw the dead car in the desert. And the
right.
other one was with the woman who's in her dream, her husband was always chasing her in a recurring dream. And I don't know if this was just you advising her to actively imagine the dream forward and turning and facing her pursuer, and what that revealed, or if that was actually in another version of the dream that she turned. But maybe you can talk about those two
Okay.
if you remember those two.
Well, one of them, it would. She was. There's a lot of monster chasing dreams. A
Oh,
good example. The one you made me talk about is this woman. It was one of my classes, and she said, "I have this dream. I had this dream for the longest time where this monster was chasing me, and chasing me, and it always. I was always up against the wall, and it scared me, and I woke up. So it was a constant nightmare." And then she said, "Well, one night I was up against the wall, and I realized I've been there before." And she turned around to the monster and says, "What are you going to do to me?" And he says, "I don't know, lady. It's your dream." But this is the same process that the dream had going on. I mean, usually when somebody's chasing you like that, it's a part of yourself that you're trying to run away from. It could be an old trauma or something like that. But what the dream was basically doing is brought her into a little bit of lucidity, made her turn around and face herself. So that's
mm-hmm.
the coming up with the scenario, a new
Yeah,
scenario. Let's face the problem. And then the problem basically said, "Hey, it's up to you. You know,
yeah.
this, it's your dream. You can handle this problem."
Yeah.
So that's again
Well,
that same function. Kind
it
of,
is. Well, and I do remember that one now that you say it, but the one that I was thinking of too was the one where the woman was being chased by her husband, and when she
yes,
turned, it was her husband's
your
face dissolved
father's face.
into her
Yeah,
father's face.
father's face. Yeah, that's another good. That's exactly the kind of creative scenarios that dreams up with at night to try to help us recover from these bad perceptions about ourselves and life.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the case. She was constantly dreaming about being chased by her husband, and I guess the relationship was pretty good, but she just never could own up to him. And basically, what she was complaining about in the class, this was one of my Richland classes. She was complaining that he's behind all of our marital problems. It's his fault, et cetera, et cetera. And one night she came into the class. She said, "I had a strange dream about him last night." She said, once again in the dream, he was chasing me. I was running away from him or turning away from him, et cetera. And I finally turned around and I looked at him, and on his face was my father's face.
Yeah.
And she
Yeah.
realized then, that it wasn't her husband; it was her issues, daddy issues.
Daddy issues, right? That she was projecting onto her husband what had
Yep,
really been started in her psyche by her father. And yeah.
yep, exactly.
Yeah. And then what say more about the one about the car in the desert?
Oh
Because I
yeah,
just
that
think
that,
that's such
that
a
was kind
great
of cool.
symbol.
Um, uh, this actually was my dream. I
Oh,
had
it
been
was.
offered, yeah, I had been offered. I had a teaching position with George Washington University for many years, and then just kind of quit doing. Didn't have much time to do it, and they came back at me a couple of years later. Said, "Bob, we really liked your course and stuff like that. They said we'd like you to do this again for us, but we'd like to tape it this time."
Uh-huh.
So that we have it in perpetuity. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, I haven't kept up with this part of the tech. It was a technical course. I haven't kept up with this technology for 2 years, and it's changed. And I just, I can't do that, et cetera. And so I was going to call them the next morning, turn the whole thing down.
Mm.
Well, that night I had the dream where I was wandering through the desert, and I came upon an old rusty car. And of course, that old rusty car represented my thoughts about, it was a
Yeah.
picture of my feelings that I'm just old rusty and I can't do this. And it's over for good because the car wasn't going to run. It was dead. And all of a sudden, this character comes up from the left behind me. It's a representative of the unconscious, I think.
Hmm.
Basically says, just go up and shake the man. He's just
Uh-huh.
asleep. Go up and shake him. And I argued with this thing. No, no, it's kind of like Jung talked about the ego arguing with the shadow.
Uh-huh.
I said, I argued and argued. I said, nope. It convinced me. Okay, okay, I'll try. So I went up and shook the man, and he came alive.
The like dead man in the car.
Yeah, that was me, the dead man in the car. So I shook him. He woke up, came alive, and the whole car turned into this beautiful sports car and took off.
Wow.
And again, even though I worked with dreams constantly, I didn't analyze that dream. I just, thought it was kind of a clever dream, and I wrote it down, but had no idea it had anything to do with the course. But the next morning, I found myself calling George Washington University and accepting. You
Wow.
know, nothing
Wow.
changed between that and except I learned in the dream
Yeah.
without even knowing it until later I figured this out, that the learning occurred there.
Wow.
So that's probably one of the most valuable functions of sleep and learning.
Yeah.
In fact,
It's,
Ernest Hartman, I loved his saying. He said, basically, dreaming is part of a wake to dreaming to wake cycle. In other
mm,
words, it's a wake learning cycle. In other words,
hmm.
it's important to our learning. Without the sleep, it breaks that link.
Yeah.
So it is part of our daily learning cycle.
Yeah. I think, just to give a little context here, Jung's idea of the psyche as compensatory, that there was this function that the psyche played, that if our conscious attitude was out of balance or too heavy in one direction, that the unconscious would bring this material, this in symbolic form, but this unconscious material that we needed in order to be more in balance. And so that's what's happening in our dreams, is that our unconscious is trying to move us toward a more integrated state by showing us these things that we're not conscious of.
Exactly, and they're using counter to our thinking
Hmm.
in order to help us switch. It's actually the name is it's actually called a counterfactual,
Okay.
or in even more scientific terms, it's called an error mismatch.
Huh.
But yeah, the dreams are known to absolutely do that, and it's very creative too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's as if the dream has gone into your memory and said, "Look, this is wrong. We got to fix this."
Yeah. Right. And I love just what you said about how, I mean, obviously, when we work with dreams consciously and bring, that awareness, bring to our consciousness what these symbols might be saying, I think that it's helpful because it's bringing us, toward this consciousness of what's happening. But like your point is so good that, even if we don't analyze the dream, it's very possible that our psyche has learned what it needed to learn and then can act based on that even when we aren't consciously making those connections.
Right. Yeah. The element of dreaming, working on your dream and getting the conscience involved is very important because all of our dreams don't always end like this.
Yeah.
Sometimes they just leave us with the question.
Right.
And that's where dream work comes in. Is the approach I use, I used to use it in a therapy called Dream to Freedom. It's still pretty popular it usually is useful for trauma therapy and things like that, where you bring in the dream, and we use tapping to intercede and get the emotional intensity down. But quite often the dream didn't finish, so I'll use it
Hmm.
again. Go back to Jung, and I'll say let's see if we can finish the dream using active imagination.
Hmm.
And we'll put the person at the end of the dream. Okay, put yourself at the end of the dream. What were you feeling? What were you trying to do, etc. And how did you feel at that moment? And just dwell on your feelings. And now let the images flow. Put a new ending on the dream that's
Yeah.
positive. Don't
Yeah.
think about it. Let the images flow. And by just doing that, you allow then the conscious mind to finish the dream. It's still coming from the unconscious, but you can finish the dream And it's really a great therapeutic approach because it gives
Hmm.
people now new tools to how to deal with the situation in waking life that might not have been apparent either from them thinking about the dream or never got finished in the dream.
Right. Right. And that reminds me, there was a dream that I had a few years ago that was really powerful. And I did an exercise, was talking with a friend of mine who's a therapist, but we sort of went like dreaming the dream forward, like you're just talking about. And in the dream, I was on a train with my father passed away when I was a kid. But,
Hmm.
there's a lot of lingering father issues and complexes, in
Yeah,
me
right.
from a lot of
They
stuff
never pass
from,
away. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, from those years. And so in the dream, I'm on a train with my father's body in like dead body in a coffin, like in a box, but
Wow.
but open. And we're
Yeah.
on this train and I'm kind of like hovering above him. And there was this weird like sign above his head with like at a train station when you see those signs flip 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 and it shows you
Yeah.
the destination or the time or whatever it is. It was kind of like that. There was this information that I was observing by hovering above him, and then there was like this he said there was this message, like he said something like you'll be here next, or like this, which I interpreted as like
Oh my
you'll be in this
gosh.
coffin next. And that's where the dream ended. And so when I went back into it with active imagination, what was really interesting was I felt like I had been in a process of trying to bury my father, like trying to bury the negative effects, of the trauma that was, his influence on my life. I was trying to bury that. I was trying to resolve it and bury it.
Yep.
And so that's to me like when you're carrying a body on the train, you're carrying it home for burial.
Yeah.
And but then in the what I was able to do is be sitting next to him in the dream in this active imagination. And this feeling that I got was like there was a sense in him of that if I buried him, I there would be no connection between us anymore. Like if I was going to do what I was trying to do, his connection to me would be severed forever. And so I was
Wow.
able in the active imagination to connect with him in a very compassionate way and acknowledge his own pain and my pain and sit with him in a way that was just a holding and a compassionate holding. And that felt so positive to me. It was like such a beautiful
Oh, that's beautiful.
transformation of that dream into something very positive.
Yes. Yeah, so Jung's approach for the active imagination, when used at the end of the dream, is very powerful, as you realized.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's
have a quick example if there's time here.
yeah, yeah,
This
it's
very
definitely.
similar thing. We had a this used to well, still give a lot of workshops and conferences. I gave one at a conference called ASIP, and there was a woman who came into the workshop. And basically, when we got around to who wants to work on something, she basically said, "Look," she says, "I've got this horrible trauma, this anxiety that comes in up in me every time I try to care for my boyfriend." Her
Mm,
boyfriend just was going into the hospital just for a little operation, one big deal. But every time she thought about taking care of him, this anxiety just rose up to the point, she said it, so to the point that I can't stand it anymore. Today, I'm going to tell him that it's over. You
wow.
know, there was no other problem in their relationship. So I said, okay, what was your dream? She said, I said, the dream, it was a nightmare last night. She said, I was on in a house that I was building with her ex-husband, and my mother was there. We were looking out at a tree at black things, and we had to decide whether they were birds or bats.
Ah,
Okay, and she said it was a nightmare. Doesn't sound like a nightmare, but He says, I woke up and it was terrifying. And so I use this Gestalt approach. Anyway, six magic questions, people know it as.
Yeah.
But three of them I said, okay, as it, become the bird, or go back into the dream and look around at anything that just pops out. And she says, a lone bird's nest. Now, it wasn't there in original discussion, but it popped
Interesting.
out. And so I
Yeah.
said, imagine yourself as a lone bird's nest and answer these six questions. Well, three of the questions were, what do you like about being a lone bird's nest? I like being able to be soft and warm and nurturing to the birds that come and sit with me. Okay, and what do you dislike? She said, I dislike getting crapped on. And I said, well, what do you fear the most? Getting blown out of the tree.
Wow.
And so these are even though she was pretending to be the bird's nest, these are messages coming out of the unconscious. I said, okay, well, what's that sound like? You
Mm-hmm.
know, getting crapped right. She said, oh, well, my husband, ex-husband, we were building this house, and had done everything he wanted for time after time. And he shows up late, screaming and yelling at me, and I said, let's get divorced. So it was the moment she got divorced that these feelings came into play.
Mm.
And we did some tapping on it and reduced the stress level of the memory to a point where it just seems silly to her now. But then we went in the back of the dream. I said, the dream was unfinished. Put yourself back at the end of the dream and let the images flow. What happens? She says, I fly away with the bats. I
Mm.
said, bats? That didn't sound good.
Yeah.
But I said, but she was a birder. I says,
Wow.
what's the difference between birds and bats? She said they both fly away at night. But the thing about bats is they fly away at night, but they come back to nurture the young and the others in the nest. And I said, well, how does that relate to a solution in your waking life? She says, oh, I can still be me, fly away, and be free, but I can still come home and nurture.
Mm.
And I said, what decision does that make for you? And how can you use that as a decision going forth? She says, I'll tell my boyfriend today that we're going to stay together. And this wildest thing happened. At that moment, he walked into the room and she ran up to him and started kissing him, and everybody was crying.
Oh, wow.
Beautiful. So yeah, that active imagination can really help when finding a solution that you can use in waking life.
Yeah.
That's where it's very useful, like you did
For,
in yours.
right, right, for sure. Before we pause and go into part two's discussion, which I think we're going to talk a lot about soul dreaming and lucid connections in the
Right.
spiritual realm or spiritual world between people. Um, I want to just come back a little bit more to that sense because I think this is such an important thing about dreaming, that the way that dreams are picturing emotional content, and how, even, our the worst nightmares that we have can be the most instructive and the most healing because they're really picturing that emotion very strongly. So can you
Exactly.
say a little bit more just about that role of the dream?
Yeah, exactly. Nightmares. In fact, Ernest Hartman was one who wrote a lot about nightmares being how helpful they are.
Hmm.
And you can see what happened in the dream where the little monster was chasing the woman, and she finally turned around. It was a little monster that says, "Hey, it's your dream. What you can do with it?" And there's I did a study a couple of years ago on there's about 45 years of dreams after a Vietnam vet had come back from the war and post-traumatic dreams. And he registered about 150 of these, what he called his nightmares because he had PTSD, PTSD
Hmm.
nightmares. But I watched, he put them in a database so I could do a content analysis on them. And as
Hmm.
I went through the database and looked at the content of the dreams, uh, you could see the dream was doing the healing. And for example, at the beginning, right after He came home from combat. He had 3 years of dreams of these nightmares where he was constantly cowering in bunkers. They started out with bunkers, and they put him in a more of a fearsome place. After that, they're more like basements of houses, and so suddenly he was more outside and things like this. So the dream was changing, but the thing was the same. These missiles coming in to blast around him, and enemy attacking, etc.
Yeah.
And nothing was changing. Then all of a sudden, in one of the dreams, when the enemy was attacking, he got the idea, or the message came to him. He looked around at his buddies. They were all cowering like he usually did. But he stood up, he took his machine gun, and mowed them all down.
Ah,
And that was the beginning of the healing.
wow.
So these nightmares, when you're dealing with nightmares, uh, if you look at how it just changes gradually over time, you can see the dream is trying to do something. It was making it more frightening for him because he was taking away the bunkers,
Yeah.
but yet at one point he had to stand up and take care of it, and it's called mastery. It's the one
Oh.
thing that dreams do to reduce trauma, is it to by mastering the situation, and it led to his eventual deep reduction in his PTSD. But during the process, I counted, he had 145 impactful dreams like this. 45 of those dreams provided the alternative solutions.
Wow.
93 were attempts at mastery like this, and 52 of those attempts worked. So you could see just throughout the dream was doing it itself. Even he
Wow.
had 2 therapy sessions during this, which I'm sure helped, but you could see the dream making the changes internally. And it was
Wow.
these nightmares that were doing it.
Wow. That's amazing. You come away from these kinds of experiences, whether just hearing about other people's experiences or your own, with, I think, such a strong feeling of humility and an honoring what our psyches are capable of is just amazing.
It's kind of like the way I look at it, it's kind of like every other biological system in your body. When you cut yourself, you get a scab, and it
Yeah.
heals itself. This is the brain's, I call it dream is your scab, but this is the brain's way of healing itself.
Right,
It's just a
right.
natural function like the rest of our biology, but it's so much more clever.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And just again, just before we jump to the next part, maybe what can you say about your own perspective of where the sacred is in all this? Like, where
Ah,
do you see, whether you call that just mystery or God or the cosmos, where do you see that sense of the whole, the greater whole at work here?
well, I think it kind of gets into the philosophy of what we are fundamentally what we are.
Mm-hmm.
Are we physical bodies having a God experience, a spiritual experience, or are we pure spirit having a material experience?
Mm-hmm.
And there's an awful lot of, in fact, the entire quantum field and quantum physics is beginning to discover God, discovering that we are, even at the atomic level, subatomic level, we are nothing but energy.
Mm-hmm.
One of the findings is that even the electrons, which we might consider tiny little particles, are really called standing waves of energy
Wow.
that appear as matter. So we are at fundamental nature. We are energy. We are spirit, and we are conscious energy.
Mm-hmm.
Because matter is formed when there is an observer in the quantum field, and the only observer left is us,
Yeah.
God, the mind
Yeah.
of God,
Yeah.
etc. So we are basically spirit. So
Yeah.
that's where it comes from. And I like the way Jung said it. He says that consciousness belongs to the brain is an illusion of my conscious mind, and that is supported by the many in the medical community that have gone through near-death experiences and seen
Yeah.
people come back with basically dead brains who can still remember things and that sort of thing. So if you come from the position we are spirit,
Hmm.
then that kind of answers the God questions. It's just how spirit makes its way into this process of dreaming as stuff that seems mysterious to us, but it's extraordinarily natural.
Right, right, right. And that's the thing I've often, that's like one of the core messages of what I've been trying to do is that this is not about some supernatural entity reaching into our lives and invading our space to give us messages. This is a very natural, embodied experience of a greater wholeness and of a greater web of life that is speaking to us all the time.
Yeah, in fact, I was invited to give a speech at Hayden on just exactly that. They said, "We want you to talk about collective, collaborative dreaming."
Mm,
And I'm going, "Oh my goodness. But that's what it's all about. And the ending slide basically says it's natural for us to be collectively collaborating at the spiritual and cosmic level, you
yeah.
know. So all these dreams, there are these psychic types of dreams where we're having mutual dreams or seeing things that are happening elsewhere, et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing mysterious about that. That's what we were basically exist to do, is
Right.
to connect with the universe. So yeah,
It's like the most natural thing going.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to the first half of this episode. If you'd like to go deeper, click on the link in the show notes to access the full episode for paid subscribers of The Sacred Everywhere on Substack. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share this episode far and wide. I'd love your help to grow this channel. Until next time, may you notice the sacred everywhere.